So there needs to be that fundamental reshaping of how Nigerians conceive of themselves, of how Nigerians conceive of the world around them, how Nigerians take in information and process it, how Nigerians argue, how Nigerians, the thought process that Nigerians make use of to synthesize truth or what they think of as truth. These things need to be changed because the sort of toxic soup that currently exists up there is what ensures that despite it being much harder for Nigeria to be poor and to be wealthy, Nigeria consistently manages to snatch defeats from the jaws of victory. That is not by accident. That is something that is being deliberately made to happen. Right? The scale is being thumbed. Again, I'm not going into who is thumbing the scale and why, but the scale is being thumbed. At any point, if Nigerians were to wake up psychologically and realize the sheer power that they hold and the potential that they wield and the sheer the capacity to change their story.
Good day, good day, good day. It's October 1st, 2005, Independence Day in Nigeria, 65-year-old. Has Nigeria fared well? A lot of people are disagreed. It's faring behind schedule. It's not doing too. Is the problem political? Is it constitutional? Yes, we're going to look at what really is going on, what has gone wrong, what can be corrected. We're going to compare to other African countries, whether the problem is followership, leadership. Like I said, could it be constitutional? Are we meant to be together as a country, or should we have just adopted the Indian example? Pakistan, Bangladesh, then India, or Sudan and South Sudan, or simply the Malay example, Malaysia and Singapore. Well, I have a guest that can help us out. He's an erudite scholar. He's very active in these areas, and he knows a lot about the continent of Africa. He's written about it. He's spoken about it. Yes, my good friend, David Hundeyin. David, welcome to State of the Nation Atlanta Discuss, the October 1 edition.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a while, yeah. So, David, Nigeria is 65 today. Is there anything that can be celebrated about Nigeria today? Is there anything worthy of, oh wow, we've done this, Nigeria has done that? Is there anything worthy of celebration? That would be my first question to you.
So there are things in Nigerian history that have been worthy of celebration at specific points. But right now, at this specific point that we're in 2025, is it a place that you celebrate? No, it's not. Especially over the past 10 years. I mean, the degradation in the quality of national existence has been very clear and unmistakable. So I think it's very dishonest to claim that there's anything to celebrate right now. There clearly isn't. However, there's that is not the same thing as saying that it's a completely pointless country and it's a lost cause. I don't think it's a lost cause. It's certainly a losing cause, but it's not a lost cause yet. So that it's still a recoverable position. But obviously every passing day makes it just that little bit less recoverable.
Oh wow.
But that's why I guess people like us have to keep on doing what we can do until hopefully the message gets through.
When did Nigeria get it wrong? We've had years of military government, years of civilian. If the civilian government we have today started from 1999, that's roughly 26 years, but nothing seems to be changing. I agree with you on that, actually. But where did Nigeria get it wrong? Where's the foundational area that we can nip in the bud and say, this is where it went wrong?
Well, the issue is that I don't think that Nigeria is a country that has ever understood the importance of its independence and what sovereignty means. I think the people who made up the so-called independence generation, both the political class and the generality of Nigerians at the time, were people who didn't. First of all, I think it's very it's well recorded history that unlike our African contemporaries like Zambia or Zimbabwe or Kenya or South Africa or even Ghana, there wasn't really a broad-based independence struggle in Nigeria. Not really. There were a few people who were obviously pro-independence, but the Nigerian people have never at any point in time, both pre and post-colonial, come together to fight for a single cause. As a result, there's never been that unity of purpose that binds people emotionally to the concept of self-determination and national unity and sovereignty. So these are just English words to us. We don't understand the importance of those things and we have no attachment to them whatsoever. I've been privileged enough to travel around Africa, and what I can say is that even though the much of the rest of Africa isn't necessarily having a great time either, but the most striking difference that I can see between countries like the ones that I mentioned and Nigeria in terms of your experience of those countries is that the citizens of those countries, whether or not they like the government, whether or not they agree with the government, whatever issues that they're having, the citizens of this country actually understand to an extent what it means to be a Kenyan or a Tanzanian or a Rwandan or Uganda. It actually means something. Whereas in Nigeria, again, because of that absence of that shared historical purpose, the term Nigerian is an aspirational term. It's not yet a term that fully describes the sort of emotional and psychological aspirations of any group of people yet. So as a result of that, there is this very damaging idea in the Nigerian public imagination that Nigeria is basically the prom queen, and your job as a Nigerian is to wait and hope for your turn with the prom queen. Right? So it's instead of thinking of Nigeria as your patrimony that needs to be protected because it's what you have and it's all you will ever have, it's rather thought of as this place that this farm that you go, like, is this rich farm that is just full of, tubers, and you just go there and rush and harvest what you can while the harvesting is good so that you can take what you've harvested and go and eat it elsewhere. So I remember telling an old friend of mine that, so the context is we went to university together. We went to the University of Hull in the UK, and we came to the realization that the caliber of British students that we met there were from almost like the lower classes of British society. Whereas we considered ourselves to be elite in Nigeria. Yeah, because our parents could afford the £15,000 a year to send us to Hull. Whereas Hull in the UK is not considered to be a place where any kind of elite kid would go to. Rather, the aspiration of the UK elite is not to send their kids to the US or to Canada or to Australia or anywhere. Everything is homegrown. They have their own homegrown solutions, which are globally respected. And it's a similar situation in China. The best Chinese students, they don't go to Hull or Southampton or, the University of New Jersey or something. They go to Shanghai University. They go to Tsinghua University. Same goes for the American students. The best of the best go to the Ivy League schools. The Canadians, the same thing. The Australians, the same thing. The Indians, the best of the best, they go to IIT in Bangalore, right? Nigeria is the only of all those countries with like a similar population profile. Nigeria is the only one that has no sort of popular idea that there should even be such an institution in Nigeria. Rather, the popular idea among the so-called elite class is that how you signify your eliteness is by taking your family and sending them out of Nigeria. I think that says a lot about the psychological situation of the Nigerian human being. That it seems that the pinnacle of Nigerian ambition at this moment in history appears to be getting out of Nigeria. Somehow that makes you better than other Nigerians when you left and you don't live in Nigeria and you are basically a stranger in someone else's country. In some cases, as a literal refugee, and somehow that places you above the highest person in Nigeria. I think that really says a lot about where Nigeria is psychologically. So, in answer to your question, where did Nigeria get it wrong? I think where it went wrong was even before independence. I think there was never really the type of education that was needed to create the type of Nigerian citizen that needed to exist. The and when I say education, I'm not just referring to formal education. At every level of Nigerian culture, both the formalized and the informal parts of culture, the education that was needed to create the type of African that was needed to own this accidental empire that was gifted to us almost called Nigeria, that education didn't exist. So instead of the independence generation, generations above it, coming up to see Nigeria as a very, very big shared opportunity to become world leaders, because that realistically is what Nigeria should be
Okay, yep.
in terms of its population profile, its resource endowment, its location. Let me give you a very clear idea of just how unique Nigeria is. Now, you're aware that the country is like partly Sahel,
Mm-hmm.
like as much as half of the country is Sahelian.
Yeah,
Now,
Sahelian.
if you look at Nigeria's Sahelian neighbors,
Mm.
so Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Chad, even up onto Eritrea, and you look at the population profiles of those countries, you realize that relative to their landmass, those countries are very underpopulated. Niger is geographically bigger than Nigeria. It's 1.2 times the size of Nigeria geographically. It only has 20 something million people in total. Now, Nigeria, having a relatively small landmass compared to these giants like Mali, and Nigeria has 200 million people. What does that tell you? That the means to support life in such numbers, which doesn't really exist in all those places, exists in Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Because first of all, Nigerian soils are insanely productive.
Mm.
The freshwater sources are insanely plentiful.
Mm.
The Basically, without being an excellent country in any way, Nigeria has been able to support a quarter of a billion lives.
Mm.
Imagine what Nigeria could do if it got its act together to the level of Brazil or
Mm.
Indonesia. Yeah. So, but the Nigerian human being has not been conditioned to think of Nigeria in those terms, to think of Nigeria in global terms, that you could be leading the world. You could be the standard. You could be the star in your own story.
Mm.
The Nigerian human being has rather been trained to think, to first of all, look down on Nigeria, obsessive, without even knowing why you're looking down on Nigeria, right? To, um, to not bother to learn much about Nigeria because the average Nigerian is very, very ignorant about Nigeria. Most Nigerians statistically do not even leave their state of origin. Most Nigerians, the state they were born is the state they will die, they will live and die in. Statistically, that's just the reality. So, we're very ignorant about the Nigerian entity that exists and the promise and potential that it holds. And consequently, it is the case that it is outsiders, it is non-Nigerians, non-Africans, in fact, who understand Nigeria to a greater extent than most of the people who are Nigerian citizens. So for that to change, that's where I guess people like me are trying to make whatever impression we can make on the public psyche, that there needs to be a fundamental retooling of the Nigerian mind. Nigerian mindset is a problem unto itself. Nigerian people have been weaponized against Nigeria, right? I'm not going to go into who has done that weaponizing and for what purpose,
Well, yeah.
but the Nigerian brain itself has become a weapon fashioned against Nigeria. So there needs to be that fundamental reshaping of how Nigerians conceive of themselves, of how Nigerians conceive of the world around them, how Nigerians take in information and process it, how Nigerians argue, how Nigerians, the thought process that Nigerians make use of to synthesize truth or what they think of as truth. These things need to be changed because the sort of toxic soup that currently exists up there is what ensures that despite it being much harder for Nigeria to be poor and to be wealthy, Nigeria consistently manages to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. That is not by accident. That is something that is being deliberately made to happen. Right? The scale is being thumbed. Again, I'm not going into who is thumbing the scale and why, but the scale is being thumbed. At any point, if Nigerians were to wake up psychologically and realize the sheer power that they hold and the potential that they wield and the sheer the capacity to change their story that they wield as a collective, Nigeria's story could change in a decade or less. It realistically could happen. All the fundamentals are there. All the necessary preconditions and resources are there. Everything is there. The only thing that isn't there is the awareness of the fact that all these things are there and that, you know, these things are possible. So I guess that's the challenge as Nigeria turns 65, getting Nigerians to understand the reality that they exist in, not the reality that they think they exist in, and getting them to step into the position that they are supposed to be playing in Africa and in the world so that the story can change.
Oh, wow. So, do you think colonialism has a role to play in the current situation in Nigeria? Because I mean, like you said, Zimbabwean have a sense of nationalism, South African, Ghanaians, Kenya, because there's a semblance of fighting for independence, which Nigeria clearly does not have. But do you think they were all these countries were also colonized? But do you think the role the British played in putting Nigeria together has a role in all this?
Oh, yes, it definitely does. The British obviously didn't put Nigeria together with
To
the
work.
intention of accidentally,
Mm,
yeah, they put Nigeria together with the intention of accidentally putting together
mm,
this potential African superpower,
mm,
which is what it is. They didn't do that with that intention. And I think once they realized that this is what this country could turn into, and this could be a threat to their interests, then they had to figure out a way to subvert it. And unfortunately for us,
mm,
the British were, and believe it or not, still are,
mm,
because, and I say still are, I'll get to why later, but
mm,
they were the world leaders in creating sort of psychographs of entire populations and figuring out how to subvert entire populations for the purpose of war,
mm,
right? The British were at one point the most successful warriors in history at some point. In terms of waging war and conquering land, they conquered 25% of the planet's territory at some point. Not even Genghis Khan managed that.
mm,
So what they figured out in the process of doing all of this was that war is not just fought with guns and with swords and with ships and with weapons. War is also fought psychologically. So they were the world leaders in information and psychological and epistemic warfare.
mm,
And I came across a video of a former CIA agent, John Kiriakou. I think his name is John Kiriakou, saying that the CIA still rates what he described as the dirty box of British tricks,
mm.
that is still rated higher than that of the CIA
Oh, wow.
because they have that institutional bank of
Mm,
knowledge,
mm,
that understanding of how to map people's psychology and how to weaponize people's minds against them and how to sort of make people sabotage themselves. The British were world leaders at doing that. So what they figured out with Nigeria was how to weaponize the Nigerian population against itself.
mm,
So one of I guess the genius in a negative sense, but one of the genius things that they did was creating these false ethnicities, which Nigerians don't realize are completely false.
mm,
So, for example, the thing that we now know as Yoruba, which is now some sort of historical fact,
mm,
people are always mind blown and sometimes react with almost violence whenever I mention that even the term Yoruba is a fairly recent creation. If you go back in history, 250, 300 years, there was no such thing as a Yoruba people. That even the word itself, Yoruba, is not native to the culture that's known as Yoruba, right? There were different groups of people who spoke mutually intelligible languages, but and who had some cultural similarities. They worshipped in similar ways. They had obviously the Ifa system and all that. But these were not the same people. They didn't see themselves as the same people. But one of the genius things about British colonialism was that it figured out how to not just to divide people, but how to temporarily unite people. So for the purpose of fighting other people next to them. So Nigeria was set up. It's not by accident that Nigeria has three majority populations centered in north, southwest, and southeast. It's not by accident. That was done intentionally to create this tripod of eternal tribal war. The British knew exactly what they were doing when they did that. Because what was done with the so-called Yoruba identity, that's amalgamation of Ijebu, Ife, or you're a group of people into this soup that is now known as Yoruba. Just by the way, to tell you how insidious this thing is, some of the people who were taken into slavery from what is now southwestern Nigeria, in places like Colombia and Cuba and Jamaica, who still speak the language and who still practice some of the culture that their ancestors passed on to them. None of them uses the term Yoruba to describe themselves. It's foreign words. Some of them use the word Lukumi. They use different words, but the word Yoruba is a completely foreign word to them. That was an identity that the British used to unify a group of people for the purpose of setting them against another group of people. Because a similar thing was done with the so-called Igbo people. There also was no such thing as an Igbo people. That is an identity that doesn't exist. It was created as a colonial umbrella, unifying, Aro and, people from Aro and people from Ebonyi. If you were to go back in time 150 years and tell them you are both one thing, you are both Igbo, they would have your head. What do you mean we're both one thing? You people are the slave catchers who are capturing us and selling us into slavery on the coast. You are our mortal enemies. What do you mean by this thing called Igbo? Well, that's what the British did. They created this panoply called Yoruba and this panoply called Igbo. And even in the north, they did something not quite on the same scale, but something similar, which is why we have this very funny idea that the north is Hausa. Meanwhile, that's not the case at all. The north has hundreds of ethnic groups, many of whom happen to speak Hausa as a trade language, which we in the south don't realize is a trade language for them. And we group all of them together as Hausa. So you see someone who is Bachama, someone who is Bariba, you see Hausa. That's what the British did. So they were geniuses understanding how to use people's native, bigotries and prejudices and sort of turn them into sort of self-propagating, what's the term I'm looking for? Self-sabotaging and self-propagating, what's the term I'm looking for now? Essentially to make sure that generation after generation, these issues don't get fixed because these artificial feuds are passed on from one generation to the next. Sometimes will even intensify from one generation to the next. In Nigeria's, not too distant history, we've actually fought a war where 3 million people died over this. And when you get down to the heart of the matter, it's all smoke and mirrors, right? The Igbo identity, smoke and mirrors. The Yoruba identity, smoke and mirrors. The Northern identity, smoke and mirrors. That's the genius of the British. Now, having acknowledged the genius, the negative genius of the British, that is not to say that the British are gods or that the British have the power to predestine or predetermine how our lives are going to be lived. Because again, that's where education becomes very important. Once we understand that these behaviors that we keep on exhibiting didn't come out of nowhere, and that these self-limiting things that we keep on doing where somebody's plan for us so that we keep on limiting ourselves and we stay where we are, which is beneficial to somebody's economic and political interests. Once we figure that out, then we will also figure out that the minute we stop and that we have the power to stop, and the minute we stop, the sky is not going to fall down. Right. So one of the messages I have been trying to push out with every platform that I have access to in Nigeria specifically is that um, this North versus South divide, which has existed, which we think of it as a historical fact. Nigeria has always been, there's this psychological line that we draw somewhere, like somewhere in Makodi, demarcates where it's north and where it's south, and that we are two different civilizations. Yeah, and actually, that is that's an idea that has been put into our heads because once you leave, once you take a 6-hour flight away from Africa to anywhere in the world, there's nobody you'll meet anywhere in the world outside Africa who can differentiate Miriam from Sokoto, from Adenike from Agege. They can't tell you apart, and they're not interested in telling you apart. Whether this one is Muslim, this one is Christian, it means nothing to them. Whether this one is Hausa or Fulani or Nupe or whatever, or this one is Yoruba,
except of course
or
the British,
Efik.
the British will know for obvious reasons.
Exactly. But the generality, and not just the generality of people, the foreign policy of the countries that actually move and shake in this world, that foreign policy doesn't recognize any difference between them. Right. So in the US, for example, the Kissinger report, which forms the basis for US foreign policy for Africa, and has formed the basis since the 70s when Henry Kissinger penned this report. That document basically states that the purpose of Black Africa, and the term Black Africa was used, it was very blatant. The purpose of Black Africa is to serve a specific economic role in the world. And that economic role is to be a source of cheap industrial inputs for the global industrial economy, which was dominated by the US. That was it. So the raw materials that feed the consumer economy, right? So the idea of the consumer economy, which existed then, obviously it's collapsing now. But as it existed then was that the raw materials, the cheap raw materials come from Africa. They go to Asia, where there's cheap manufacturing and cheap beneficiation that is done before the consumption now takes place in Western Europe and in North America and maybe Australia. And those places where the consumption takes place are the places that have obviously the highest standards of living. They have the highest valued currencies. The level of value addition or perceived value addition is highest within those countries. In Asia, it's slightly lower, but they are still higher than Africa, which is right down there at the bottom. Your job as a Black African is to dig things out of the ground or to facilitate the digging of things out of the ground. Be those agricultural inputs like cash crops, be it crude oil, be it solid minerals. That is the economic role of Africa according to US foreign policy. So whether you're a Black African from Ilejemeje or you're a Black African from KwaZulu Natal, it really makes no difference. Your purpose is the same in terms of the geopolitical understanding of those who run the world. So what I have been trying to push out, the message I've been trying to push out to whoever I have access to, whichever pair of ears and eyes I have access to in Nigeria, is that I'm not asking you to like fellow Nigerians. I'm not asking you as a Christian to like Northern Muslims, and I'm not asking Northern Muslims to like Southern Christians. I'm not asking Igbo to like Fulani or Hausa. I'm not asking Yoruba to like Igbo and vice versa. You people can hate yourselves all you want. However, understand that you have a bigger geopolitical adversary out there who doesn't recognize any difference between you. So if you want to survive, especially at a time when the world, the so-called international rules-based order, which has existed for 30 or 40 years now, is breaking down in front of our eyes every day. Right? There's a literal genocide happening in front of us, has been happening for 2 years, and nobody can do anything about it. Everybody can see it. It is being live streamed. If I open my Twitter app now, I can see what a Palestinian's brains look like on the floor. And I've been looking at it for 2 years, every day. And nothing happened, and nothing will happen. That's the world we now live in, right? The world we live in now is no longer the world of UN peacekeepers and UN Security Council resolutions and no-fly zones. And the world we live in now is a world where might is right. It's a very, very dangerous world. It's a world where somebody is already looking at a map of Africa and has already started mapping it out based on this is where critical minerals are. This is, this is where the things that we need for our whatever are. And eventually they will decide one day to just march in there and take it because they can. And nobody's going to stop them. Because you are going to stop them, you and what army? That is the direction the world is heading toward. You are hearing the rhetoric coming out of Washington. It's not just rhetoric, right? That is the Trump doctrine. That we no longer want to use the liberal method of neocolonialism or imperialism. We don't want to go subvert people, foreign countries using NGOs and using our soft power and our secret infrastructure, intelligence agencies. All that one is true. It's long story. Frankly, we're not bothered with any of that. We want to do it the old fashioned way, right? We want to do it in the way that our forefathers who founded America did it. By walking in there and shooting anybody who says no, right? They believe that this is the white man's creed. This is the white man's right, right? That the white man has some inborn right to rule and dominate the planet and to take whatever he wants whenever he wants because he is superior. They genuinely believe that. So facing such an adversary who is not just a loud-mouthed buffoon, but who has the world's second largest nuclear stockpile and who has the world's largest military with 800 foreign military bases, we should understand that we are existentially threatened right now. So however much you dislike somebody in Sokoto because they lit Deborah Samuel on fire and burnt her for blasphemy, yes, we get terrible thing. Whoever did it, who has been punished, that person should absolutely be punished. Whatever, there's no punishment that is too much on this planet for that person. We know that. However, you will not say that because of that, you will now look at this other threat that is coming to wipe both of you out of existence and take your land, and you will say, no, I prefer this one. I prefer some guy coming to wipe me out of existence and wipe me out of history because I have a grudge against Yusuf from Kaduna. That no, there's a bigger issue. So you deal with that bigger issue first. And then after dealing with that shared threat, then you handle whatever issue there is to be handled in-house. That's what I'm trying to make people understand now, that we have bigger problems. We have real enemies.
Let me quickly ask you this. I see you're a proponent of the three Sahelian states. I'm talking Burkina Faso, Niger, and I think Mali. I see you support their leaders, what they are doing. They just broke out of the ICC. So my question on that is this, right? It's two in one, but they are similar. The Asian countries, the Malaysia, the Indonesia, they handle colonialism better than we did in Africa. So the question of what are they doing differently? Then those three Sahelian states, of course, they're all under military rule. What are they doing differently that you think is worthy of emulation? And what, like the first question is, the Asian, if you look at India, for example, India didn't lose sense of its culture, their dress sense. While we were wearing suits in Africa, the Indians did not do that. They still held on to their culture. So what did the Asians do well? And what is it that the three Sahelian states are really doing that make you, really support everything they're doing?
Well, so in as much as some people are really not going to like to hear this, it must be said. The primary reason why the Asians were able to maintain their core sense of self and that colonial mentality never fully penetrated to the extent to which it penetrated in Africa. The reason, or the core, there are many reasons, but the most important reason
they didn't
is that the Asians never
100%.
Yeah, the most important reason why they didn't absorb it 100% like we did is that they never let another person dictate to them what God looks like. Right? The gods that Asians worship, and you can fact check this. Every Asian culture, the god it worships looks like either the people in that culture or something that is visually relevant, that is visually familiar to the people in that culture. So Vishnu, the Indian elephant god that has 6 arms or whatnot. It's an elephant. Why is it an elephant? It's an elephant because Indians are visually familiar with elephants. And it's not just any elephant. It's not an African elephant. It's an Indian elephant, right? Why is it not a rhino or something? Because Indians had no way of knowing about the existence of rhinos. So their personification or their visualization of God was something which they were visually familiar with. So regardless of however much you come and tell them they have to learn English, they have to wear a suit, they have to do this, as long as when they are communing with what they think of as the supernatural, they are communing with something that reminds them of themselves. That core sense of self cannot be taken away. The Japanese that worship Shinto, or the Chinese prior to the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese who worshipped they were Buddhists, right? So they worship Buddha. What does Buddha look like? Buddha looks like an East Asian male, right? What does Shinto look like? It's an East Asian male, right? They are basically worshiping their own image. Same thing with the people who colonized us. They're the Jesus that they created, because the Jesus they created and Jesus in the Bible are two different people. Let's be clear about this. The Jesus in the Bible was spoken of as somebody with hair of wool, woolen hair, and skin like bronze. That does not describe someone that looks like the Jesus that white people brought to us, who is a sort of like blonde haired, blue eyed Caucasian. But they created that version of Jesus because they understood that for a society to maintain a healthy sense of self-respect, the God that he worships must look like that society. It must reflect the society. Africans are the only people on this whole planet who worship gods that do not look like them or anything that is familiar to them. Right? Over 1 billion Christians in Africa. None of them worships a Jesus or a God that looks like an African person or something that they are visually familiar with in Africa. They all worship a white man. Right? There are nearly 1 billion Muslims in Africa as well. The Allah that they worship is an Allah that specifies that for you to be a good Muslim, when you pray, you have to face a city that is on another continent and you have to speak a language that comes from another continent. Right? So for you to be a good Muslim, you can't be a good Muslim and speak Zulu. When you're praying, you have to speak Arabic. You can't be a good Muslim and face Ile-Ife when you're praying. You have to face the Hejaz. That's the reality. So that being the case, it's impossible that people whose sense of self has been tampered with at that deepest level can retain the self-respect that is needed to maintain that core, that identity core that they need to maintain, to retain their culture. And that is pretty much the most fundamental reason why we were able to be so thoroughly penetrated. It was that the very visualization of God. Bear in mind that I am not here saying that there is something wrong with the concept of God. Whether or not I'm atheist or not, that's completely by the way. I have no problem with people believing in God or the supernatural. However, the visualization of the supernatural is a completely subjective thing. Everybody else in this world understands that except Africans. Africans think that the visualization of the supernatural is written in the Bible somewhere, right? Africans believe that the typification of Jesus as a white man has basis in biblical fact, which it categorically does not, right? But if you tell most African Christians that Jesus, going by what we describe today as black, the person who existed as Jesus historically would today have been classified as black, they would see that as blasphemy, even though that's historical fact, right? So there you go. That's so until that, there are so many issues that need to be fixed in the African psyche, and that's one of the most fundamental issues.
What about the three silent states? I know you support, but especially the guy in Burkina Faso. What are they doing differently? I mean, we've had military rule in Nigeria before. We've had counter coups and all that.
Yeah.
So what is it that they are doing differently that make them so special? I mean, it's when I read most of the things you write, actually everything you write, you make it sound like they just got their independence, from wherever, So what are they doing right?
So this is where I think a very important distinction needs to be made.
Okay.
Because people often say, "Oh, we've had military rule before. It wasn't great.
That's why
So
I
why are
asked.
you praising military rule?"
Mm-hmm.
The point is not the military rule in and of itself, right? Military rule can be just as disastrous as democracy or civilian rule, whatever you call it. So the issue is not with the it's not with the medium of leadership. The issue is with the content of leadership, of that leadership. So, in the case of, say, Nigeria under, let's say, Babangida, that was military rule, right? But who was really in charge? Was it Babangida that was in charge 100%? Because the answer is no, he wasn't. Babangida was essentially the Tinubu of his era. That's what he was. He was a sock puppet of a foreign government. It's no coincidence that the only two times in Nigeria's history that Nigeria has gone into a structural adjustment, but even though it's not the term, it wasn't officially called structural adjustment, but the two times that's happened was under Babangida and under Tinubu, because that's exactly what Nigeria is going through now, just with another name, right? That's not a coincidence. So yes, it was military rule, but it was simply, the issue is that the the ultimate control of the government still lay somewhere else. In this case, in Washington. So he was just the local representative. He was just the middle management, right? He was not the one in charge. So what makes the Sahelian people different is that, unlike the military, because in the case of Burkina Faso, for example, Ibrahim Traore replaced another military officer. So the military rule in and of itself is not what is special. The issue is that he came in and took the decision to act as a sovereign. He took the decision to break off those colonial ties with France. All three of them made those decisions, right? They didn't just talk about it, they did it. They broke off. In some cases, they had to physically force French diplomats to leave. They had to risk the possibility of getting invaded by the French, using Nigeria's military as a proxy. And they actually looked that threat in the face and stared it down, right? They took decisions that were not easy to take. Because bear in mind that this is very well known that in that part of the world, like the last leader who tried that in Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara, we remember how he ended. He was assassinated in a French-backed coup, right? It's not a secret. The French themselves boast about it. That, yeah, this guy was getting ideas above his station, and we showed him who his boss. We knocked him off. So it's known in that part of the world that when you try to start asserting sovereignty, the things that happened to Thomas Sankara, the things that happened to who was the guy in Guinea? I forget his name, but that those things are liable to happen to you.
The first president of
Yeah, yes, the first president. I completely forget his name
I
now.
forgot Sekou
Yeah, Sekou Toure, exactly.
yeah.
The things that happened to Kwame Nkrumah, because I'm sure even his death now, I think it's now coming to light that his death wasn't just a sickness, right? He was basically assassinated, right? These are the things that happen to an African leader when he decides to act as a sovereign. But why I was so excited about them, in addition to them choosing to make sovereign decisions and act as a sovereign, is that they displayed a level of tactical understanding of how the world works you very rarely see in Africa. And what I mean by that is the people who came before them who tried to act sovereign, the same mistake was what all of them made, which was that instead of aligning properly, that opportunistic alignment that allows you to figure out where am I best situated, on this global chessboard, where are my interests best protected, right? They, instead of aligning strategically, they all did this thing called non-alignment. We face neither east nor west yet, which is a very good, very nice sounding platitude. Unfortunately, it just leaves you wide open. And they all got knocked off one by one. In a world that is completely aligned, you cannot be non-aligned, especially when you are weak. You and which nuclear weapon are non-aligned? If India says that they are non-aligned, and India, which is a nuclear superpower, is finding it difficult to retain their non-alignment because Trump is trying to bully them, and they are being driven more and more and more towards the inevitable geopolitical union with China and Russia, and that's a country that has I think the world's third largest economy, and that has nuclear, is a nuclear power and everything. It has over 1 billion people, and they're still finding it difficult.
They're the most
What do you
populous
mean with your
actually in the whole world today. They have the
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what do you mean with your 40 million country in Africa? You are going to, stand up and you are going to be non-aligned. You and who? You and which army? So what the Sahelian guys have done is that they have aligned themselves strategically, right? That alignment with Russia was a masterstroke. First of all, it's the reason why, in at least 2 of their cases, is the reason why those men are still alive. Because without that security canopy, something would definitely have happened by now, right? And what they need is time. So as long as they can stay alive and they can keep pushing through these decisions that they keep pushing through. For example, leaving the ICC, which is something that has been spoken about in Africa for years. They were the only ones who had the balls to actually do it, right? And the longer they stay in power, the more they entrench these changes into the economy, into the national psyche, the more that sovereignty and independence in those places stop being a thing that is talked about aspirationally and to start being an everyday, ongoing fact. Why that is so important to me is that you will then see a situation where, for the first time in Africa, for the first time in modern history, there will be a region of Africa where the default way of thinking isn't Western dependency or any kind of dependency. That the default way of thinking, if you're listening to them talk about, for example, building new infrastructure, I grew up in Nigeria, so when I'm used to hearing Nigerian government speaking about building new infrastructure in terms of awarding contracts, and when you see who those contracts are awarded to, the subcontract, because the real contract and the subcontract are different. The subcontract who actually does the work, more often than not, is some white guy or some Turkish guy or some Chinese guy, more often than not, or maybe an Indian guy, right? So you will see them building roads in Nigeria, and you are seeing Turkish people at the construction site, and you're wondering, is there any fifth generation technology that is involved in laying asphalt on that, right? That Nigerians don't know how to do it. Why do you need a foreign person to lay a road? You don't see that in these places because their way of thinking is fundamentally different. They rather will go and buy equipment, make large investments, billions in equipment, send people, not even send people out, bring in the foreign experts or whatever to train the locals to use those equipment, give those foreign experts a fixed contract of maybe 3 months or 6 months to train the locals. And then when their contract is done, they go away. And then the locals are the ones who are going to use that equipment and build the country themselves. What that means is that the institutional capacity and knowledge bank of that country is being built. And that country is being designed to retain its own knowledge, to retain its own capacity, and to compound it. That doesn't happen in most African countries. Most African countries are designed to be farms. Once you become good at anything, you leave. Once you become excellent, somebody poaches you and you leave. Right? Those countries are not designed to retain talent to stay in the country and build the country. But that's what these guys are doing differently. And that's what I love so much about them. People can't see it yet because, I guess when people will be convinced is when people start seeing the visually spectacular stuff. When you start seeing
Let me ask you.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Now, these guys, Traore in Burkina Faso, I can't remember the guy in Niger's name and the guy in Mali, they're all military, right? But everything they have done,
Yes,
you have enumerated, as I've read it also, can also be done by a civilian president in an African country.
yes.
Understand? So now the question is, in Nigeria, which is the focal point of our discussion anyway, is our problem failure of leadership, or we have so been booby-trapped by the colonialists that you think we can't recover, or the office of the citizen, like you said, the people just have to make up their mind and rise up to the occasion and determine what will happen. But like you said, and I agree with you on that, there's a lot of tribal distrust, religious distrust. So it's looking every day like it's impossible. But now, can a civilian leader in the Nigerian context achieve that total independence, based on an election? Or Africa just have to fashion out its own model of democracy?
So under the current Nigerian democratic system, it's fundamentally not possible. The last president who tried it was Goodluck Jonathan, and it didn't end well for him. Till now, 10 years later, I think it's fair to say that a majority of Nigerians still don't even understand what Goodluck Jonathan was about and why he actually had to leave office. They still don't understand. When you talk to the average Nigerian about 2015, you still hear them saying things like corruption and clueless and, incompetent buffoon, and just repeating those sound bites that were created by marketing agencies, right? They have no idea what the actual issues were, and the fact that it wasn't their vote that took him out of office. It was a foreign-led regime change operation. They still don't get it, right? The current Nigerian system is designed. First of all, the term limit is 4 years. You are not going to get any serious governance done in 4 years. Let's just be plain and honest with ourselves about this. The first year is for appointing people and stabilizing and paying people back for favors during the election and whatnot. The next year and a half, the next 18 months is for whatever governance you can manage to squeeze in. And then from the 6th month of the 3rd year to the end of the term is campaign. So essentially, out of 4 years, you have 18 months of governance that takes place in the Nigerian system. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the Nigerian president, even though the presidency is a very powerful office in Nigeria, on paper, the president has the power to do and undo, because obviously that constitution was written by the military, who intentionally made the head of state very, very powerful. But be that as it may, I like the way you use the term booby trapped, because the presidency has been booby trapped in multiple ways. I think the easiest way to illustrate this is using Abacha, who wasn't even a civilian president. He was a military president, right? He was a military head of state. And those who got to him still got to him. With all of his security and with all the protocols and everything, apart from the fact that they got to him, like as a person, like he got poisoned and he died. Apart from that, if you recall, well, I mean, you definitely recall because you were old enough to have lived through this. The final maybe year and a half of Abacha was actually very turbulent in Nigeria, right? In as much as in his mind, he would have imagined that he was trying to stabilize the economy after the Babangida debacle, and he was trying to act sovereign. He was making friends with Gaddafi, and he was trying to do what he thought was a form of sort of socialist Pan-Africanism. In his mind, that's what he thought he was doing. However, while that was happening, the country was falling apart. In some ways, it was during the Abacha era that Abacha stove became a thing, right? And it became a thing because the economy was so stressed by sanctions that were placed on Nigeria that people could barely feed, right? If you're going to be truly sovereign, then your economy needs to have the capacity to be sanction proof. The way Russia's economy is sanctions proof, or China or North Korea's economy is sanction proof, right? Nigeria is not there. Nigeria imports everything. Nigeria imports wheat for bread. I remember reading a story in 2022 after the war in Ukraine had broken out. Ukraine was still sending ships full of wheat grain to Nigeria. Nigeria was still buying wheat from a war torn
not just Nigeria, to African countries.
Yeah. So if you, as a civilian president with because you don't have 8 years, you have 4 years. Your 8 years is never guaranteed, right? So as a civilian president with 4 years, within that 4 years, what you need to do, first of all, is somehow make your country food secure. You have to fix your entire food insecurity problem, because if anything should happen, the easiest way to sanction you out of existence is by simply placing a sanction on your food. And your own people will chase you out of Aso Rock with pitchforks. That one is guaranteed. So in 4 years, you need to fix what is basically a 6 to 10 year problem, which is food insecurity. You have to do it in 4 years. You have to, in the space of 4 years, you also have to basically carry out a total purge of your security and intelligence apparatus, which I don't know how you want to do that. I really don't know how you're going to do that, because you are even though you have the president, even though you have the power of the president, you don't really have the power to just rip up the whole thing like that. Because if you piss off enough people at the same time, they will get rid of you. If you make enough people align against you at the same time, they will get rid of you. Which, by the way, is exactly what happened to Goodluck Jonathan. He got enough people aligned against him, and they got rid of him, right? Or they took part in the operation that got rid of him. So your hands are basically tied as a civilian president in Nigeria, as an elected president in Nigeria. There is not much you can do. The most you can do is what the likes of Yar'Adua, Jonathan, to a lesser extent, Obasanjo did. You can liberalize a few things here and there. You can pass a few good laws here and there. You can invest in infrastructure. You can, commission new projects. But that's pretty much the most you can do. The minute you try to make any real sovereign policy decision, like which Jonathan tried to do with the Naira Yuan swap deal, that's it. You're gone. Some guy in Washington at the State Department is just going to pick up the phone and be like, yeah, we need to get rid of this guy. And once they say that, next thing you know, your entire media, information, and civil society space in your own country, I don't think people realize how dangerous this situation is, where you live in a sovereign country, but everything that enters your eyes and ears in that sovereign country is controlled by someone living in Washington. So your entire media is just going to be weaponized against you. That's exactly what happened between 2013 and 2015. You couldn't open any Nigerian newspaper, news site, radio station, TV station, and not see the same message repeated to you in 10,000 different ways. Goodluck Jonathan is the devil. Goodluck Jonathan has messed up again. Goodluck Jonathan is terrible. He's a terrible leader. He's responsible for corruption. And you're seeing the same thing repeated 10,000 different ways. And you don't realize you're not watching news. You're watching a marketing campaign that's been directed from DC. Because they are the ones funding everything. Be it your Channels TV, be it your Premium Times, your Rice TV, your ICIR, the cable, your Sahara Reporters, even just your local radio stations. They are also receiving funding from BBC Media Action, which, as we know, was receiving its funding from USAID as well. So, in so many different ways, you are being astroturfed. That's what happens. That's what happens to your population the minute you decide to take a sovereign action.
Time, and I still have 2 questions for you anyway. So yeah.
Okay.
So yes, I was happy you mentioned Jonathan. I saw you with him in Accra recently, and do you think he's going to run for president again? Did you ask him?
I did not ask him again. It's because someone else asked me this question, and my answer was visuals can be very deceiving. So just because I sat next to someone for a few minutes at an event doesn't mean we even had a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. So I have no idea what he is or is not planning to do. So my heart, I'm going to be very honest about this. My heart says yes, but my head also says no. Okay. My heart says yes as a sort of like, I feel sentimentally that the last time I truly enjoyed any part of my life as a Nigerian was when this guy was still the president. That was the last time I personally remember not feeling this constant weight of just darkness, sitting on my head as a Nigerian. Because all that changed after May 29, 2015. So my heart says yes. Okay. Because I remember, those were the good times. But my head also says no, in that I feel like, what is the point if he were to run? What would be the point of running for him? Is he ready to make the enemies that he wasn't ready to make the last time around? Because, as I'm sure you know, the decision to concede that election, he basically stepped away from the office. If a Nigerian president doesn't want to leave office, you can't force him. The only way to get him out is through force of arms. If a Nigerian president really decides that he's going to... So the fact that he lost the election and stepped aside, he basically resigned from office because he didn't want certain people to make good on the moves and the threats that they were making. So if he didn't want to do that in 2015, is he going to be willing to do it? So, and if he's not willing to do it, then what's the point of a Jonathan presidency? Is he just going to reprise 2011 to 2015 all over again? What's the point? Which is why nowadays I'm not so much concerned about elections. I'm more concerned about what is a long-term solution for this issue which we have. These are constant, persistent lack of sovereignty and lack of ability to be sovereign. That's what I'm concerned about. So if you're not coming to solve that problem, and if you're just coming to come and give palliative solutions to treat symptoms, then what's the point?
All right, so we have 2 minutes more. So Bola Tinubu, I think, has not gone to United Nations General Assembly in 2 years. Yeah, I don't know why.
Mm.
Yeah, so do you know why? And does it have to be? Is it related to what you're doing with the FOIA, Freedom of Information, which is still in court and all that? I've been asked. I don't have the answer to that, but I know that the president has not gone to the UN General Assembly for 2 years. So do you know why he has not done that? I mean, it's a bit unusual, 2 consecutive years. So does it have to do with the Freedom of Information case in court filed by your friend Greenspan and yourself?
I have no idea why this is the second time he's missing the UNGA.
Mm.
And for the record, I don't think it's because of the FOIA
Mhm.
also. It's simply because if you read through even some of the latest filings,
Mhm.
which were filed like a week ago,
Mm.
you will see that it's crystal clear that he's being protected. It's crystal clear. The judge gave a summary judgment, which basically found in our favor. This
Mm.
was in May, or was it June? Or April actually. And we're entering October now, and the judgment has not been complied with. It's
Mm.
been months, and we keep on filing motions. We keep filing for contempt,
Mm.
and we keep getting bumped around here and there, bumped around, bumped around, bumped around. It's clear that they have no real intention for of at least not now. They
Mm.
have no real intention of doing anything, at least not now. I don't know whether they intend, because they've also tried to fly the kite that they're going to start producing these documents, the unredacted documents from December
Mhm.
2025. Now, I don't see why this filing, this summary judgment was delivered in April.
Mm.
I don't see what takes you to December to start producing it when you already have the files.
Mm.
You already know very well what is in those files. If you wanted, you could have released everything the day after the summary judgment.
So,
So it seems like they are leading us on a merry-go,
well,
on
good.
a merry dance to
Mm.
me.
Mm.
So I don't think it's because of that he's not going. Because if it was that, they wouldn't be protecting him in court.
Mm.
They're very clearly protecting him,
Mm.
and they're playing. So the judge is playing bad cop. The judge is playing good cop, and then the Justice Department is playing bad cop.
Mm.
The Justice Department is openly lying in court, and then the judge issues a censure but doesn't really, take any real action. They're just bouncing us like footballs back and forth. It's a very it's a very interesting insight into how the so-called U.S. justice system actually works.
Mm.
So no, I personally think it might not even be a big issue that we think it is. It might be something as mundane as health.
Mm. That's
It
what I'm
might be something as
asking.
simple as a
Yeah.
health issue.
Yeah, because today now there's no parade, there's no military parade. You understand?
Mm.
Some people have said, oh, maybe they're scared of a coup. I don't think so. I mean, I think,
No, they're not.
I think,
Coup from who?
come from who exactly? I think the president standing consistently for an hour I mean, it might be a difficult thing for him at that age. So I agree with you. That's another way to look at it. All right. Thank you, David. Thank you for your time. An hour just went just
Yep.
like that. And thanks. It's Independence Day. A lot still has to be done with Nigeria. The largest population of Black people on the face of the earth has a lot of work to do. The Office of the Citizen has
Yep.
to be activated. The people should rally around and make their vote count. That's all we say. Make the vote count. That's what David has said. Make the vote count. And if the vote count, then you get more respect from the requisite quarter. So once again, thank you, David, for coming to State of Nation, and happy Independence Day to Nigeria. And we hope things get better in the future. Thank you, David. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.